Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, and you're listening to Incredible Life Creator Podcast. My guest today is Susan Gabriel. Susan grew up in a small town in Colorado. In 1985, she met her second husband, Clark Gabriel. 6 weeks after the wedding, her 9-year-old daughter was taken away by social services, and Clark was accused of sexually molesting her. She was told that she had to force Clark to move out and support the allegation, or she would never get her daughter back. The child protection system in the 1980s was broken and had become the very thing it was established to prevent. Her situation went from bad to worse to truly bizarre. But instead of caving to the pressure, she fought back, became activist, and started a national movement for system reform. Her story is told in her newly released book, Wheels of Injustice: Saving My Child from the Child Savers. God's grace is the book's spiritual theme as it explores her fluctuating relationship with God and ultimate reconciliation. After a lifetime career in business development, she now lives in the countryside outside a small town in Texas with her husband and her 4 dogs. Welcome to the podcast, Susan.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here and sharing my story with you.
Yes, that is quite a story. That is the nightmare no one wants to experience.
Yeah, and it's something no one ever expects. So if it ever does happen to you, you're completely knocked sideways. It completely throws you off your game and you have no idea what to do. It's something that's so foreign to even think about that, you're never really prepared for something like that.
Oh, no, you wouldn't be. So just so people can get to know who you are and what you do and where you came from, start
Mhm.
with your story from the beginning.
Sure. Well, as you said, I was born in a small town. I was very shy as a child and an introvert, and certain events in my childhood happened that reinforced that. So it actually made it worse the older I got. And I grew up in the 50s, and the era of the 50s was your prescripted path for a girl was to graduate from high school, get married, not necessarily go to college, and then have children and be a housewife. So I followed that path because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I married the first boy that came along, and had 2 children, 2 daughters, and the marriage did not work out very well. I had to bury my personality. I didn't really know who I was when I got married. I never really knew who I was. There's a story I tell in one of the early chapters about my name. I grew up thinking my name was Susie. And when I went to kindergarten, the kindergarten teacher said, but Wilma is on your birth certificate, so I'll call you Wilma. And so I was floored because I thought my name was Susie, and Susie was my nickname. And so at that point, all of the teachers and everybody at school called me Wilma. My family called me Susie. There was another girl in the class whose name was Susan. So I felt like she'd stolen my name. So I spent my kindergarten years feeling like I was totally lost and didn't know who I was. So that kind of started out badly. And like I said, then things kind of got a little bit worse as time went on. And eventually I got married when I was 18. And like I said, it didn't work out. I go into a few details in the book, a little bit more about, some of the reasons that it didn't work very well, but mostly I think it was me, because if I had been able to be myself and really knew who I was, he would never have been attracted to me. so I would have found somebody who was attracted to my personality. And anyway, we ended up getting divorced. Not long after the divorce, I went to this divorce recovery workshop and at a church, and I happened to meet the person who ended up being my second husband. I met him at church. And we met the end of August in 1985, and we got married in December of the same year. So it was very, very fast. And but we were really crazy, madly in love. So it was really a beautiful time. And then 6 weeks after our marriage, this happened. The Department of Social Services one afternoon called me on the phone when I was at work, and they said, "We have your daughter." And I said, you have Amber. Amber was my older daughter. She was 15. And so that made more sense to me. Why would you have my younger daughter? I'm my older daughter was old enough to get out and get into trouble.
Mhm.
But they said, no, we have Emily. And I just could not comprehend what they were talking about. So I rushed out, drove down to the Department of Social Services, where they proceeded to tell me that my new husband had molested her and that I needed to kick him out of the house and cooperate with him, or I would never get to have my daughter back again. I mean, they used those words and terrified me. I went home, talked to my husband, and I cried. He cried. We couldn't figure out what was going on, why it looked like Emily had been lying about him, because we knew it wasn't true. And the thing that got me the most, that most disturbed me, was that when I asked the social worker, what was it that Clark did? She said he tickled her. And I said, okay, he tickled her, but where? And she said, in the chest area and around the belly button. And I'm thinking, okay, she's 9. I knew that. I mean, what she described was normal in the way that the two of them played together. Clark is a kid, just a big kid himself, and she loved him, and she would throw her arms around his neck and she would just hang on. And then the only way he'd be able to get her to let go is to tickle her under her arms. And they had a wonderful relationship. I mean, she just loved him so much, and she called him daddy. And so the whole thing made no sense. But it just kept getting worse, and it kept getting more and more entangled. And they ended up charging him with a felony. And the penalty for that was 16 years in prison. So the stress just kept on mounting, and the pressure. They constantly pressured me to try to kick Clark out of the house, but we'd been told by the lawyer and by our psychologist that we hired that if Clark left the home, they would take that as an admission of guilt, and then they would prosecute him, and then that would go against him in a trial if they had a trial. So we stuck it out. It was killing me, to have Emily not living with me. So it just kept getting worse. The pressure kept mounting. I ended up trying to kill myself at one point, and later regretted it. But what happened in the end was God saved my life at that point. I drove into the mountains west of Colorado Springs to get away, and I had intended for no one to find me, no one to find a body. And I took a whole bunch of pills, and I laid down, and I said, the last thing I remembered was that I prayed, and I said, God, if you want me to live, I said, I just can't take it. This is killing me. If you want me to live, though, you're going to have to do something, because I've come to the end of myself. I can't do anything. And then I passed out, and I don't remember anything at that point until actually it turns out it was the next day. But the next thing I remembered was I was sitting on a curb in front of a grocery store. And it was a miracle the way I ended up getting to that point. So, and I talk about that in my book, but God was the only one who could possibly have turned that around and saved my life. So that still didn't quite convince me yet that everything that was happening, it says all things work together for good to those who love God and are called. it still didn't convince me that everything was working together for my good because it continued. This was before the trial. The trial came, they offered just before the trial started, they offered my husband a plea bargain. And it was what they called a deferred prosecution. So what they said was that if he did not commit any crimes for the next year, they would drop the charges. And it's apparently very rarely offered. So it's, something that they expect you to take when they offer something like that. And Clark would not take it. He said, no, he says, I want to prove my innocence. And the judge was so upset that he had us give all of the paperwork, all of the court paperwork, all of the psychologist evaluations, everything to his former law partner to review because he thought that our attorney was not giving Clark good advice. So we did that. His law partner came back and wrote a letter to our attorney. He outlined 7 points. He said, normally I would recommend someone take this, but in this case, I recommend that he not take this plea bargain because he says it's quite clear that Mr. Gabriel is not guilty. Then he outlines these 7 reasons why he says that he's obviously and clearly not guilty. And he said he then reluctantly advises him to go ahead and go to trial, and that after he's found not guilty, that we should sue everybody. so that was encouraging to us. That was really the first bit of encouragement that we had. But what happened, you'd think that they would take a look at that letter and drop the charges. I mean, that's logical, but no, they did not drop the charges. In fact, it made the judge angry. And he told our attorney that he was going to throw the book at Clark and give him the 16 years in prison if he was found guilty. So it was really scary for him to go to trial. The trial only lasted 3 days. I was put on the stand. Clark wanted to go on the stand and talk about it himself. So he also was put on the stand, and the jury deliberated for just a couple of hours, and they came back with a verdict of not guilty. And when they read the verdict, the judge said, okay, now you're free to go and you can talk about the case. So the first thing they did was come over to us, and they hugged us, and they had tears in their eyes, and I was crying. And they said, we're so sorry that you had to go through this. And it just made me cry so much because I just believed that nobody was ever going to believe that we were innocent of child abuse. Once you were labeled, especially back then in the 80s, once you were labeled, you just were. It didn't matter if anybody said you weren't, or if you tried to defend yourself, you just were assumed to be a child abuser. So that was a relief. So I thought, okay, now I'm going to get my daughter back. But no, they had a separate case against me for dependency and neglect. And they said that just because he was found not guilty didn't mean he was really innocent. And I had neglected to protect her from Clark and his supposed abuse. So it makes no sense to me. How can I protect her from something that's not happening? But they continued on. And the dependency and neglect trial for me was scheduled a few months away. But a couple of weeks after the jury trial was over, I found out I was pregnant. So we were glad, and yet there were times I was just terrified because I was afraid I could just envision them standing outside the delivery room ready to take my next child away. So I was both thrilled and terrified. Just before the trial for my dependency and neglect, I went to the obstetrician on a Friday afternoon, and he said, I'm sorry, but the baby's died. So they couldn't do surgery that day. They were going to have to wait and do it on Monday. the hearing or the trial for me was scheduled for Monday morning. And then that afternoon, I was going to have to go and have surgery to have the baby removed. So I just couldn't go on anymore. I couldn't keep fighting them. I just didn't have any more fight left in me. So I told my attorney, I'll sign the paperwork they want. And that was to give up my rights to my daughter, so that I didn't have any more custody rights at all. But I was going to still be allowed to have some visitation with her, but not when Clark was around. And it all had to be supervised. So I was still getting all this time supervised visits with her, about an hour a week. And that was all I got to see her. So I said, I'll sign it. And they assigned a social worker type of therapist who was in charge of us reintegrating as a family. And it had to be according to her schedule. So I was thinking she's going to drag this thing out forever. So I wanted a clause put in there that if we disagreed with that we could have someone of our own choice review it and come up with another opinion. Mm-hmm. So I went ahead and I did it. I signed it away. And in the meantime, we started pulling together the paperwork to sue them. And we, in the meantime, found out from our attorney that we couldn't sue them because they were covered by something called sovereign immunity. And it's what happens. A lot of agencies, governments, and people who work in those types of service industries are covered by this. And it means that you have to get their permission to sue them. And of course, there's no way, they're not going to give us permission to sue them. So they were off the hook. And we had mounds of bills to pay. But at that point, I was just so angry at everything that had happened and all of what they had put us through, and the fact that we couldn't do anything about it, that I decided I'm going to make life hell for them, because they made it hell for me. And I thought, I'm going to expose what they're doing. So I investigated, I found out what was going on. I found out the laws that had previously, a few years before, been changed. And that was one of the reasons why people were getting falsely accused and why they had so much power. So I decided, I'm going to expose this. And I wrote a letter to the editor. I called into talk shows. I found out there were a whole lot of other people who had similar situations. So we started banding together and started a local group. Then I learned of others in other states. So I connected with them. We just kept expanding. I kept speaking more. I was called by the media all over the country this is the part that used to really make me shake my head. They would call me and they would say, well, we have a child abuse case here in Portland, Maine. And then they'd give me briefly the story. And then they say, we would just like to have an opinion from the other side. And I would say, you're talking to the wrong person, because the other side of a child abuse case is going to be someone who's in favor of child abuse. And then that would give me the opportunity to say, we are totally opposed to child abuse, and especially the abuse that's perpetrated by the system on the families that they separate without an adequate investigation. So I was able to get my story out there and my message through. We eventually got the attention of the national media through a large, it was called Ms. Magazine. Back then it was a big magazine with a large circulation. They wrote and had an entire story written up about us with a blurb on the front cover. And that caught the eye of an author who was looking around for another book to write. And he thought this was a really interesting subject. So he interviewed us. He included our story in the book. That got the attention of the Today Show, and they sent out a crew to do an interview with us. So when this author's book was released and he was on the Today Show, they showed this interview with us. So we really got a lot of attention at that point, and I couldn't go to the grocery store without people recognizing me. And I'm an introvert. I never wanted to be in the limelight. It just happened, and I did it because I just had to do something. I couldn't not do something, because once I saw what was going on, and then I fought for my family, and then once there wasn't much I could do with my family, I saw what was going on for other people, and I didn't want other people to have to go through that. So that's why I thought. We were then asked to be on a committee it was called task force, to change the laws. So we worked to rewrite the laws, and we did that in Colorado, and then other states used some of the new laws that we wrote as model legislation for their own laws. And the man who wrote the book, he was so moved by our story and the story of the other people that he went to Washington, D.C. and started a national organization. He worked in full time as the executive director. It was called the National Coalition for Child Protection Reform. And it's still working today to, try to make sure that the foster homes are good, and that, the Child Protection Services is still doing things the way that they need to be doing them. So it completely changed the system. So that was what I was doing. And all during that time, I still had to keep my job. And that my job I was working when my daughter was first taken. I was working as an assembler for TRW, and they put together the modules for the space shuttle. And then I eventually became interested in what the technicians were doing, the test technicians. So I went to school, became a technician. Then one day it was kind of slow in our department. So the technical writing department was underwater, and they needed help. So my boss loaned me out to the tech writing department. And 3 days after I was loaned out, I realized this is what I really enjoy doing. I was really enjoying doing the writing, and forget the testing. It was more fun for me to write. So I got into, that's how I really fell into writing. And although I used to write stories when I was a kid, and I loved writing and I loved reading, but I never really thought of myself as a writer, and never thought of it as an occupation before. So I spent the next 30 years basically in the proposal professional capacity. So as a proposal professional, I wrote proposals, edited them, managed them. I did all kinds of things, all related to proposals. But it taught me a lot about how to write. But the problem was it wasn't really a conducive style to write, say, a novel, because it's very stilted. You don't use contractions. You don't use, partial sentences, incomplete sentences. You don't start a sentence with and. But when I started writing for myself, I wrote in a conversational style. But it took a little bit of time to learn how to do that, because I'd been so used to the technical writing style. And so that was and I have to say, there was one thing that took place that was the reason that the book is in existence. And that is that, first of all, I started writing the book back in 1990. And while I was writing the book, I had to go through all of the paperwork from the court so that I got all the facts straight. And it was so traumatic that I put it away and I couldn't finish it. So it sat for 30 years, just not getting done at all. And then I happened to meet someone online and got into conversations with him, a young man who lives in Nigeria, and he was just like 25 years old. And he was so fascinated by my life, something completely foreign to him. He kept asking me questions. We conversed very frequently. He asked questions about my life. I would explain to him, and I even got into detail about what had happened to me, what had happened to my daughter, about our family. I told him the whole story, and that really changed my writing style, so that all of a sudden I was writing it as a conversation, because I was writing to him, and it was all messages, like Twitter messages, on the direct messages. And sometimes I wrote him emails if it was something longer and more involved. And I pretty much told the entire story of my life to him. And that was the beginning of me bringing all of that paperwork back out of storage and starting to write the book. I thought, I can finish it now. I've told the story again. I've relived it again with my friend, and I can write it now. So I would write a couple of chapters and send them off to my friend. His name is Drew. I sent them off to Drew, and he would read them, and he would have questions about them. So his questions helped me to really pull things together in my mind and make everything more coherent and more clear, because he this wasn't even really his first language. So he was struggling a little bit, but it was a good thing, because he learned English much better, and I learned how to write, so things were more clear and more focused and more organized. So he was a huge help. There's no way this book definitely would not have been written if not for him. So he's still a wonderful friend of mine, and we're still, I'm talking about what my next project is going to be. And, I have really learned, found a love of writing. And then the other part of what I like to do is I enjoy poetry, and I didn't know I liked poetry, and I didn't write poetry until I met Drew. And one day I was just being silly, and I wrote some little poem in response to something that he said. And I thought, well, that was kind of fun. And so then just to be silly and fun, I started writing some more poems, and that was fun. And then I just kept doing it. And I found that, wow, I really love this. I loved writing in metaphors. I loved to think in metaphors. That's how my mind works. It thinks in pictures. So poetry for me was just a perfect medium. So I write a lot of poetry. In fact, there's poems included in my book, Wheels of Injustice, just because they seemed to fit so well in certain spots. They do a better job of describing my feelings at that moment than maybe ordinary prose would do. So that's why I've included those. And if people don't like poetry, don't worry. It's not a lot. There's just a few. So, it's not going to interrupt anybody who thinks they hate poetry. But that's pretty much where I ended up today. And now this shy person hasn't had to do any public speaking for years, because the child abuse industry, that era is over for me. And now I'm back speaking again in public. So here I am. And I feel that this is where God wants me to be. My relationship with God has just been up and down my whole life. And it took years. Now, my friend Drew is a very strong Christian too, which is wonderful, because when you've got a good, strong Christian friend that you can talk to about God, and we share devotionals every morning. We talk about the different Bible verses that are in them, and how that's meaningful in our lives. And that just really feeds you and keeps you going during the day. So my relationship with God right now it's the best it's ever been, because I feel like he's here with me, and that I'm doing what he wants me to do. I'm not doing this because I want to do it, because if it were my choice, this is not what I would be doing. But I feel like it's what I'm supposed to do. I'm finding meaning in it. I'm finding it to be a fulfilling way to live my life. And I just want to share that with people and encourage other people, especially if they're going through difficulties and a hard time. I would really highly recommend to find some kind of spiritual guidance, some kind of spiritual belief, something that's bigger than just yourself and your problems, something that you can uh, rely on to believe in, so that you're not just relying on your feelings, because your feelings are going to, my feelings were all over the place. And my feelings, whenever I have to speak in a podcast, are all over the place. But I just have said, okay, I'll open my mouth and God, you just put the words in it. So I just try to rely on that and not worry about it. But two other things I did want to mention that I struggled with in my earlier life. One was I struggled with comparing myself with others, and the other one was worrying about what other people thought of me. And of course, that's part of being shy, is that you're worried then about what other people think of you. But after going through what I went through, and being thought of as a child abuser, I got over that. I mean, that pretty much is gone. If other people don't like me, or other people, if they think I'm stupid, whatever they think, I don't care. It doesn't really matter. I know who I am. I finally know who I am. And sometimes it can take a while, and I would encourage other people, don't give up on that. Sometimes it can take a while before you really get to know yourself. It can take other people showing you who you are. When I first met my husband, I realized I was a different person. I was not the person that I was when I was married to my first husband. When I met my second husband, my personality, you'd think I were two different people, because my personality was very different, and it has been ever since. So, and it takes another person. I think a lot of times they're like mirrors for us. We can see ourselves in the other person, because they will give us feedback. And if it's someone that is sincere and honest, and they give you good, honest feedback, then you can really grow from that. Of course, there are people out there that are just, if you're smart enough, or, if you're, let's say, in tune enough with what other people are, their real intentions are, stay away from certain people that their intentions are not good. But I think if you can find that one or two people who are good-hearted people who want the best for you, they will be wonderful mirrors, and that then they can show you who you are, and they can show you things that you didn't even know about yourself, and that gives you courage to do things that you never thought you could do. So that's really my life in a nutshell.
Yeah, so that is quite a story. I mean, I can't even imagine going through that. And, we all want this happy ending at the end. So the happy ending was you were supposed to get your daughter back.
Yeah. And I got her back 3 years later, but it wasn't an easy route, but it was 3 years later. And speaking of happy endings, I have to mention one more thing about the book. There, in the last 3 chapters of the book, is a surprise that I don't really talk about usually in a podcast, because I'd like people to read the book. But I guarantee that people will be shocked and dismayed at what happens, because if I were worried about what other people thought of me, I would not have included those last 3 chapters in this book. I would have ended it with everything is hunky-dory. I got my daughter back. The system has been reformed. The end. But no, that's not where my life ended. And there was another piece of it there that God had me go through that really sealed my eventual return to him, and me really finally saying, okay, I can't do anything without you. I can't, I mean, I needed his forgiveness. I mean, my life turned out very well in the end, but not because of anything that I did. It obviously was all because of what God did for me. And that's where it is in the end. The whole book is really not brought to an end until the very last chapter, until you know what happened. And it's a miracle. My whole life was a miracle.
Mhm. That's beautiful. And that's the best kind of book, right?
Yeah,
Keeping
it
us turning
is.
pages until you get to the very end. And you're like, oh.
Yeah. Yes. And I wrote my book with the intention of it being like a novel to
Mhm.
pull people in. I want people to feel what I felt. So most people say that's exactly what they feel. They are say, they're blown away and moved to tears. Parts of it are funny, parts of it are terrifying. I just like I encourage people to read the book. I think they'll enjoy it, and I think they'll get something from it. My main intention, I want to entertain, but I also want people to get something out of it. I want them to feel inspired and encouraged, and especially if they're going through any kind of hardship themselves.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, yeah. And before we came on today, we were talking about one of your poems of the many
oh
poems
yes,
you have written.
right.
But would you like to share that one and why you wrote that poem?
Yeah, I would. The first part of this is sort of like a quote. It's a poem, but it's a poem that doesn't really have what people would traditionally think of as a poetic form. I wrote that, and then a poet passed away who was on a website that where I post a lot of poems, and we post each other's poems, and they have contests and things like that. But a very very dear older man passed away, and then I wrote the second part of this as a tribute to him. And the first part is that I wrote is, it's not what you accumulate before you go that's important, it's what you leave behind. It says everything to me. It says, if you're just working for yourself and trying to get more things, um, even if what you're leaving behind is just money, it's just money. It's not nearly as important as some other things. If you leave memories of yourself where you've taught people things about themselves, or you've given them an opportunity. One of the things that Drew says is that when we met, he was extremely discouraged. Uh, he was on drugs. He was, in a bad place, a very bad place. He was had just been orphaned. Um, and had 4 younger siblings to take care of. So he was in a bad place. So that what I have been able to give to him, and I did this unbeknown, I didn't really realize any of that until later, but to give him the encouragement to move forward. Now he's going back to graduate school, and he's helped his sisters in their finishing their college education and getting one is a nurse and the other one is a fashion designer now. So he's really helped them. I've helped him, he's helped them, and it's something that's what the legacy is. That's what you leave behind, that is way more important than just leaving a pile of money to your grandchildren. So the rest of the poem goes this way. It says, we were placed upon this earth and given certain gifts at birth. Gifts of some raise wild applause, but gifts of others give us pause. Quietly they reach for stars, then open up and share their scars. Fragrance in their poems penned will fill our hearts and never end. So that's how I feel, about poetry too. It's something that you can leave behind, and people can get something out of it, that maybe opens up some new revelation for them or encourages them in some way. And that's what I like to do. So I think one of my next books is going to be a book of my poems,
Mhm.
because just because.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful. And thanks for sharing that. That is, it's just not only touching, but when you think about the words that you're saying in that poem, I
Hmm.
think most people can relate to that.
Hmm.
And, with just taking the time to open ourselves up, be vulnerable, share what it is that God gave us to
Hmm.
do. Because, I too am an introvert, but I'm doing a podcast, I'm an author, I'm a speaker. But
Uh-huh.
why is that? It's because I have a message and a
Hmm.
mission.
Hmm.
And when you have a message, a mission, and a purpose, regardless of the fear that comes up or oh, that's not me, you do it
Right.
because that's you're just meant to do it.
That's right. That's right. And then when you do it, you know that that was what you were supposed to do.
Mhm.
And then it just is fulfills you, makes you feel like your life has meaning. And I think that's really the most important thing that a person can can have, is knowing that their life meant something while they were here, that they were here for a purpose.
Mhm. Exactly. So just a personal question.
Mhm.
What gives you the most happiness and fulfillment in your life at this point?
I would say I enjoy my relationships that I have, my friends, and I don't have very many, just a few. Of course, Drew and my husband, and a couple of others. And I enjoy. I that gives me a lot of pleasure in life, and also I love to spend time alone and just write poems or write articles, write stories, different things. So those two things are really my favorite things to do.
Wonderful. Now, I know there's some people who would definitely want to get your book and also
Mhm.
get a hold of you. So at this point, can you just kind of put in summary, how do they
Mhm,
find your
mhm,
book?
mhm.
Where are you doing your
Yes,
writing so they can
this is,
share it? Whatever
yeah,
what services you have?
this is what the cover of the book looks like. This is just a proof copy because my book is not in paperback yet. I'm going to put it in paperback and hardback, and that release that in January, along with a what's called a companion journal, which could be used by book clubs. They can read the book and then they can write their thoughts in this companion journal. There are certain prompts, that will help people to kind of guide their thoughts into using my experiences to grow from in their own life. So I'm putting that out in January. So right now it's an ebook. The ebook's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, Smashwords, just about any place you can get a book. My website is my name, and you'll notice my name is Susan Louise Gabriel. There's another author by the name of Susan Gabriel. So my website is just susanlouisegabriel.com. And my email, if you ever want to write to me, is just slg@susanlouisegabriel.com. And let's see, and I have a Facebook page. It's Susan Louise Gabriel author Facebook page. And that's I I have a LinkedIn as well. Same thing. Those are usually the only ones I use on any regular basis.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for having the courage to actually write the book after so many years.
Thank you. Yes, it still brought some tears up. Even though it has been so long, it was quite a time.
Mhm. Well, thanks for sharing it. And thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you. I so appreciate the opportunity to tell my story and to share the book with people.
Mhm. So I have one last question before we finish.
Uh-huh.
What is your best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
Be yourself, find yourself, and then be that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Susan. We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, thank you.